Let's learn the shtickle Toldos Shimshon, written by the Zera Shimshon and Perekei Avos, Perekei Mishna. The Mishnah begins. Reb Nechunye ben Akona says, Kol HaMekabel olav oil Torah. Anyone who accepts upon himself the yoke of Torah, Ma'virim imenu oil Malchus. He gets taken away from him the yoke of the government of the king, v'oil derech eretz, and the yoke of derech eretz, the yoke that the world has, gets taken away from the one that accepts upon himself the yoke of Torah. V'chol haporik mimenu oil Torah. Anyone who throws off the yoke of Torah, noisnim olav, gets put upon him oil malchus, v'oil derech eretz, gets put upon him the yoke of the government of the king, v'oil derech eretz, and the yoke that the world has, the way of the world. The Toldos Shimshon asks that the Mishnah changes its lashon from the beginning of the Mishnah to the end of the Mishnah. The beginning of the Mishnah, by the one who's mekabel on himself the oil Torah, someone who accepts upon himself the yoke of Torah, the Mishnah says, Ma'virim imenu oil malchus v'oil derech eretz. He gets taken away from him the yoke of the king and the oil derech eretz. So it's mashma from the word Ma'virim imenu, that beforehand he had the yoke upon him. Now that he accepted the oil Torah, now it's Ma'virim imenu. It gets taken away from him. So the word Ma'virim gives the mashmoyus that he had beforehand the yoke of the melech on him. However, the end of the Mishnah, B'chol haporik mimenu oil Torah, one who throws off the yoke of Torah from himself, noisnim olav oil malchus. We put upon him the yoke of the king. It's mashma from the word noisnim that he did not have the yoke of the king beforehand. Now that he threw off the yoke of the Torah, now it gets put upon him the yoke of the king. So the Toldos Shimshon asks, why in the Sefer are we using the word noisnin, which is mashma he didn't have it before, and in the Reisha, the beginning of the Mishnah, we're using the word mavirin, which is mashma that he had the yoke of the king before. The Mishnah should use one lashon across the Mishnah, either noisnin mimenu oil malchus ve'ein noisnin oil malchus, or mavirin and ein mavirin. Why does the Mishnah switch? Says the Toldos Shimshon, based on the Gemara in Bava Basra, Daf Zayin and Daf Ches, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda Anosi wanted to put the taxes of building the wall around the city, even on Talmidei Chachamim. Everyone in the city has to pay taxes that would go towards building the wall around the city. And Rish Lakish said that no, Talmidei Chachamim don't have to chip in, they don't have to be part of the taxes to pay for the wall of the city. Why is that? Because they have no purpose in the wall. Because Talmidei Chachamim like tzrichin etirusa, they don't need any protection, because their Torah protects them. Their learning Torah protects them, so they don't need a wall around them. Therefore, they don't have to chip in to pay for the wall, because the wall is not benefiting them. And that's what the Gemara comes out, Lamaskon of the Gemara, the end of the Gemara, that Chachamim, Talmidei Chachamim do not have to pay the taxes for the wall, because they don't need the protection of the wall, they're protected without it. Only Amiratzim, people that don't learn Torah, they have to pay the taxes for the wall. Then the Gemara brings a story that took place in Tveria. Ahu Demei Kalila, the king wanted to buy himself a crown, and he put the taxes, the money, he wanted to collect the money for his crown on the people of Tveria, on the whole city of Tveria. Also L'kamei the Rebbe, they all came to Rebbe, V'omru lei, and they told him, the people in the town told Rebbe, Leisu Rabbanu B'Hadon, the Talmidei Chachamim should chip in to pay for the crown. Do they have to chip in? They don't have to. only the Amaratzim have to pay for the crown of the king. So then they asked, Arukinon, should we run away? So Rebbe says, yes, Aruku, run away. Is Orku Palgeon, half of the population of the Amaratzim ran away from the town, and only half of the Amaratzim were left. Is the king heard about it, and he said, I agree that the Talmidei Chacham don't have to pay for it. Now that half of the Amaratzim are still left in town, so I'm putting the whole taxes on the half of the population of Amaratzim that are still here. They have to pay for the whole entire crown. So the half that remained in Tveria came to Rebbe and said, so do the Talmidei Chacham have to chip in with us? Amalu loy. So again he told them, no, the Talmidei Chacham do not have to pay. They don't have to participate in the taxes to pay for the crown. So they said, Arukinon, should you run away? So Rebbe said, Aruku, run. Is Orku Kulu. They all ran away. There was no Amaratzim left in town, except for one Pasha Hu Kovis, one person that used to clean clothing for people. He was the only one left, and the king heard about it, and he put the whole entire tax to pay for his crown on this kovis, on this cleaner. Shodyuhu akovis. So what did the kovis do? Ora kovis, he also ran away. Is poka klila. Then the king said, okay, no one has to pay for my crown. He was moichel the tax. So Omar Rebbe, so Rebbe after this story said, Re'isem, don't you see? She'ein puronos bo la'olam, all bad gzeres come on the world only b'shvil amei oretz, only because Amaratzim, because once the Amaratzim left town, so the king was moichel, then no one had to pay for his crown, even though the Talmidei Chacham stayed in town, but the king was moichel. So you see from here, Dr. Rebbe, from this story, that all bad gzeres come from Amaratzim, people that don't learn Torah. And the Mordechai brings in the name of the Rabbeinu Tam on that Gemara that when the king, after the first half of the Amaratzim ran away, and the king said that now the half that remained has to pay for the crown, it wasn't that they had to pay for half of it. He put the whole entire price of the crown on the second half of the Amaratzim that stayed. And the same thing after the half of the Amaratzim ran away and only the kovis was left in town, he put the whole price of the crown onto the kovis. He wasn't moichel anything. Different than Rashi. Rashi on the Gemara learns a different pshat, but this is the pshat in the name of Rabbeinu Tam, that after the first half ran away, he put the whole price of the crown on the remaining half. So Zog the Toldos Shimshon. The money that's supposed to be paid for a wall around the town is a thing that the city has to have. And therefore, the word oil derech eretz, the way of the world, is referring to the wall around the city. The yoke of derech eretz is something that everyone has to have. It's the way of the world. So the Mishnah starts off saying, Kol ha-makabel olav oil Torah. Anyone who accepts upon himself the yoke of Torah, he becomes a Talmid Chacham. Ma'virim mimenu oil malchus v'oil derech eretz. Oil derech eretz means the regular things that the town needs, like a wall. The Talmid Chacham doesn't have to pay for that, like the Gemara said, that he has his own protection from his Torah. He doesn't have to chip in for the wall. That's Ma'virim mimenu oil derech eretz. What's oil malchus? In this story, that the king wanted a crown, and he only charged the Amaratzim to pay for his taxes. He only charged the Amaratzim to pay for his crown. So we see, Zog the Toldos Shimshon, Pshat in the Mishnah, that if he wouldn't be a Talmid Chacham, then he would have to chip in for the wall and for the crown. Is the Mishnah says, Kol ha-makabel olav oil Torah. Someone accepts upon himself the yoke of Torah and he becomes a Talmid Chacham, Mavirim mimenu. Now it gets taken away from him, because if not him being a Talmud Chacham, then he would have to pay the taxes for the wall and for the crown of the king. Is now that he's a Talmud Chacham, is Mavirim mimenu. It gets taken away from him. Oil Malchus, the yoke of the king that wanted them to pay for his crown. V'oil Derech Eretz, and the yoke of building the wall around the city, Talmidei Chacham don't have to pay for that either. And then the end of the Mishnah says the opposite. However, kol haporik mimenu oil Torah, someone who throws off the yoke of Torah from himself, noisnim olav oil malchus v'oil derech eretz. What does that mean, noisnim? Because we saw in the story that after the half of the city ran away, now the king put the complete price on the remaining Amaratzim. That means to say that if the story would have, if everybody would have chipped in together, then they only would have had to pay half. Now that half ran away, so is added to the remaining half the complete price of the crown. So that means noisnim olav oil malchus. It gets put upon them, the yoke of the king, because they're perik oil Torah, because they don't learn Torah. And the Amaratzim, so the king put even more than they deserved on them. They would have had, if the whole city would have stayed, they would have all paid their part. Now that half of the city ran away, now he put the complete taxes for his crown on the remaining. And that's how he explains the chiluk with the Lashon, Marvirin at the beginning of the Mishnah, and Noisnin at the end of the Mishnah. Because the beginning of the Mishnah, because he's a Talmud Chacham, he gets taken away from him those taxes. Because if not him being a Talmud Chacham, he would have had to partake in those taxes. And the end of the Mishnah, Noisnin Malov, because he's Amoritz, now it gets added to him even more than he would have had to pay before. In the schus of the Zera Shimshon, may we all be zoiche to brocha and atzlocha b'chol ha'onyonim.